What happens when the most joyous day of your life takes a dark, shocking turn? This is the story of Paul and Hannah, a couple who were supposed to begin their life together, filled with love and promise. The day of their wedding should have been the beginning of a beautiful future, filled with shared memories and happiness. But just hours after exchanging vows, something horrific occurred. A betrayal so deep that it would leave scars on their lives forever. On their wedding night, a wife's affair with his best man ended in a brutal murder. Hannah, a woman once seen as loving and devoted, had secretly been carrying on an affair with her husband's best friend, Brian, someone who was supposed to stand by him on this life-changing day. The wedding night, which should have marked the start of their marital bliss, became the backdrop for a violent crime that no one could have predicted. What led to this unimaginable betrayal, and what drove Paul to kill? Could a simple affair, one kept under wraps for so long, really push someone to commit such a horrifying act? Was it the emotional chaos of discovering the truth about his best friend and his wife that ultimately led to the violence? Was the affair the trigger, or was something much deeper, hidden beneath the surface, responsible for this shocking crime? The events that led up to this night weren't just about betrayal. They were about the unraveling of a man's sense of self. It was about jealousy, about control, about the overwhelming need to hold on to what he thought he owned, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Before we go deeper into the shocking twists of this case, if you're enjoying this story so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to stay up to date on more chilling true crime stories just like this. And don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts. Stay tuned as we uncover more about this heartbreaking betrayal. Hannah and Paul Miller were the picture-perfect couple, devoted to each other, planning their future, and ready to start their new life together. They had met in college, their bond built on shared dreams and ambitions. From the very beginning, they seemed inseparable, both successful in their careers and deeply in love. Their engagement was the talk of their circle of friends and family, and everything appeared to be falling perfectly into place. Their wedding was planned to be a beautiful celebration, one that would mark the beginning of their lifelong commitment. But behind the smiles and laughter, something was brewing that neither of them could have anticipated. However, as their wedding day drew closer, Paul's best man, Brian, became increasingly close to Hannah. What appeared to be a simple friendship soon evolved into something much more secretive. Paul and Brian had been best friends since childhood, sharing memories of growing up together, sharing their dreams, their successes, and even their most difficult moments. It was only natural that Brian would be there for Paul on his wedding day, standing beside him at the altar, supporting him in his most significant moment. But as the wedding day approached, something began to change. Brian and Hannah's friendship, which had always seemed innocent, started to take on a new, more intimate nature. Their late-night chats, private moments away from Paul, and the little gestures of affection didn't go unnoticed by Hannah's husband-to-be. At first, Paul didn't want to believe it. He thought nothing of it. After all, it was just his best friend and his bride-to-be, both of them incredibly close. But a nagging feeling began to settle in his gut. Soon enough, what had started as a quiet friendship became a full-blown affair. Hannah and Brian's connection, once a harmless bond between friends, had crossed a line. It began shortly after their engagement, behind Paul's back. Neither Hannah nor Brian said anything to Paul, both of them choosing to keep their secret hidden as best as they could. They managed to carry on their relationship, all while pretending that everything was fine. The affair, however, was far from the innocent flirtation it seemed at first. It became something much deeper, more consuming, leading to the most devastating betrayal Paul could ever have imagined. Despite the growing tension, Paul remained oblivious, until it was too late. Paul began to notice subtle changes in Hannah's behavior. She was more distant, less engaged in their wedding planning, and he began to feel the emotional gap between them widening. At first, he brushed it off, attributing it to the stresses of wedding preparation. But over time, the cracks in their relationship became more evident. Their once deep connection seemed to fray, but Paul never suspected what was actually happening. Hannah had become increasingly cold towards him, and while he couldn't put his finger on it, he just knew something was off. Little did he know, the foundation of their relationship was already crumbling, hidden beneath the surface. All of this built up to the explosive night they were about to experience, the night Paul would never forget. Paul and Hannah's relationship seemed perfect on the surface, but sometimes appearances are deceiving. Stay with us as we uncover the shocking truth behind this betrayal. And remember to like this video, comment, and share this video to keep others engaged in this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life true crime investigations. It all came to a head on their wedding night. Paul, returning from the celebration, had no idea that what should have been the happiest night of his life was about to unravel into a nightmare. He entered the bedroom, expecting to find his new wife, Hannah, by his side, waiting for him to end their perfect day together. But what he discovered was something he never expected to see. His wife and his best man, Brian, in a passionate embrace, the betrayal so raw and so clear it could not be denied. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Paul stood there, stunned and speechless, as he watched the intimate moment unfold before his eyes. The trust he had placed in Brian, his best friend, shattered in an instant. But what shocked Paul the most wasn't just the affair. It was the devastating realization that his best friend and his wife had been deceiving him for months, living a lie right under his nose. The anguish was unbearable. His mind raced with thoughts of what had just transpired, what it meant for his marriage, and what it meant for the future of his family. He had been blindsided, and that sting of betrayal cut deeper than he could have ever imagined. In that moment, the man who had once been known for his calm demeanor was overtaken by emotions too intense to control. Was it love, rage, or jealousy that overwhelmed him? Or perhaps a toxic mixture of all three? Whatever it was too much for Paul to handle. The man who had once been the model of self-control now found himself in a state of emotional chaos. Paul's chest tightened as he struggled to process the reality of what he was seeing. He had built a life with Hannah, the woman he loved, the one who had promised to be faithful to him. And yet here she was, in the arms of the very man who was supposed to stand by him as his closest confidant. The hurt was more than he could bear, and in that split second, he snapped. It wasn't just the affair anymore. It was everything. The lies, the betrayal, the humiliation. It all came crashing down on him. Instead of confronting them immediately, Paul made a choice that would haunt him and everyone around him for the rest of their lives. He didn't scream. He didn't lash out in anger right away. Instead, he did something that would forever change the course of the night. He filmed them. He captured the intimate, humiliating moment in their bedroom, knowing that the footage would never allow him to forget the hurt he felt. He wanted to capture the betrayal in the most permanent way possible. After filming the betrayal, Paul walked out of the room, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of his emotions was suffocating, and the realization hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about control. His need for revenge, his anger at being deceived, and the deep humiliation he felt all converged in that moment. He couldn't live with the shame, the image of his wife in the arms of another man, especially not in front of their closest friends and family. The pain of betrayal had broken him, and in the darkness of that night, he made a decision that would forever alter their lives. He couldn't just forgive and forget. He couldn't just walk away from the shattered image of the marriage they had built. No, this was a moment that demanded action, a moment when Paul, consumed by his need for control, decided that he would make them feel the hurt he had endured. The confrontation escalated. The emotional explosion of jealousy, rage, and shame overwhelmed him. What followed was swift and brutal, a violent act driven by Paul's desperation to regain control over a life that had been torn apart in an instant. He took Hannah's life that night, ending her existence with a fury driven by love, jealousy, and the crushing weight of broken trust. That was a turning point. Paul's decision spirals into a tragic event. But was it just the affair that pushed him over the edge? What do you think triggered this violent act? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss the next part of this shocking story. The devastation following Hannah's murder spread like wildfire. The ripple effect touched not only their immediate families, but the entire community that had once admired their seemingly perfect life. Hannah's family, once proud and hopeful for her future, was now left grappling with the unbearable loss of a daughter, sister, and mother. What could have led Paul to such an unthinkable act? The community, who had known them as the picture-perfect couple, was shattered. How could a man who vowed to love and cherish his wife forever, a man of faith and good standing, commit such a horrific crime? Paul's heartache over the betrayal, the overwhelming sense of being deceived, pushed him into a dark and dangerous place. Yet, in the eyes of the law, his actions were not justified. The murder was not just an act of vengeance. It was a choice that would have far-reaching consequences, not only for Paul and Hannah's families, but for everyone who had ever trusted him. The emotional toll on his family, his community, and himself was just beginning. Word of the murder spread quickly through the town, and the once tight-knit community was now divided. The couple that everyone had admired as the epitome of love and commitment was now the center of a tragic public scandal. People struggled to comprehend how a man who had appeared so composed, so in control, could commit such a brutal act. The community was left questioning everything they had believed about Paul and his marriage. Some people justified his actions, believing that the affair alone, the immense betrayal he must have felt, drove him to the brink. Others, however, saw a darker side to the tragedy. Was the affair merely the tipping point, or had Paul's actions been brewing for far longer? Had he been harboring feelings of jealousy, control, and possessiveness for years, and the affair just exposed the cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage? As the town processed the shock of it all, people took sides, with no clear answer emerging. The devastation of Hannah's loss was undeniable, but the questions surrounding Paul's motivations would haunt the community for years to come. Detectives quickly arrived on the scene, tasked with uncovering the truth behind the murder. The crime scene painted a chilling picture of the chaos that had unfolded that night. Evidence pointed directly to Paul. His fingerprints, his phone, and even his own actions provided a damning trail for investigators. The murder had been brutal and personal. But there was more to this than just a jealous rage. Paul's phone was scoured for evidence, revealing disturbing text messages between him and Brian, the best man. These weren't just typical exchanges between close friends. They were messages laced with tension, signs of possessiveness and jealousy. The affair, it turned out, was more than just an unfortunate lapse in judgment. It was part of a long-standing emotional struggle between Paul and his best friend, and between Paul and his wife. Detectives dig into Paul's history, finding that his jealousy and possessiveness weren't new. These traits had been apparent throughout his relationship with Hannah, but the deeper question remained. Was Paul's emotional turmoil enough to justify the brutal murder of his wife? The investigators were left with an unsettling conclusion. Paul had killed his wife not only out of vengeance, but as a way to regain control over a life he had felt slipping away from him. The murder wasn't just about the affair. It was about Paul's sense of power and control, about his unwillingness to be the one left in a vulnerable position. As the investigation deepens, we learn more about the emotional toll this crime had on those around them. But what about the community? How do you think they should react to a betrayal like this? Let us know in the comments. And if you're invested in this story, don't forget to like and share with others who need to hear about this shocking case. Paul Miller had always been a man of faith, a respected pastor in his community, a devoted husband, and a father. He was the embodiment of stability, someone people turned to for guidance. But beneath the surface, cracks had begun to form in his carefully constructed life. Paul had always been controlling, though no one seemed to notice. From his relationship with his wife to the way he interacted with his congregation, Paul was a man who demanded respect and loyalty. He thrived in environments where he had the upper hand, but the moment he felt that control slipping away, something inside him began to change. For a man who had built his life on trust, the thought of betrayal was unbearable. His ego was shattered, and with it, his sense of self-worth. The affair was a tipping point, but it wasn't the only reason behind Paul's breakdown. For Paul, the affair represented more than just a betrayal of love. It was a reflection of his deepest insecurities. Losing his wife to someone he trusted, someone close to him, was a blow to his pride that Paul couldn't overcome. It wasn't just about love, it was about control. His wife's infidelity wasn't something he could accept, not because he loved her too much, but because he feared losing the only thing in his life he thought he could control: his family. Detectives uncovered more about Paul's past. His relationship with his wife wasn't always as perfect as it appeared. There were signs of emotional volatility, subtle but undeniable. They discovered that his obsession with control extended beyond his marriage. Hannah Miller was more than just a victim in a tragic love triangle. She was a mother, a daughter, and a sister. She had a bright future ahead of her, filled with dreams of growing old with the man she loved. Her untimely death left a void in the lives of those who knew her best. Her family was shattered by the realization that they would never see her smile again, never hear her laugh at family gatherings, and never get to see her children grow up in the world she had dreamed of for them. Her death raised painful questions for her family. They wondered if they could have seen the signs earlier, or if they could have intervened before it escalated. As her family mourned, they came together to honor her memory and reflect on the wonderful person she had been. But the pain was raw, and the grief was heavy. The loss was irreparable. Hannah's death sent shockwaves through the community. The town that had once celebrated the couple's union now grappled with the horror of what had unfolded behind closed doors. The community was torn. Some sympathized with Paul, seeing his actions as the result of an overwhelming betrayal, while others condemned his actions as premeditated and unforgivable. People questioned how a man of faith, who had always been the epitome of devotion and love, could fall to such depths. How could Paul, who had once stood as a pillar of his community, do something so devastating, especially to the woman who had been by his side all those years? Did he act out of rage? After a long and emotionally charged trial, Paul Miller was convicted of murder. The prosecution argued that Paul had premeditated the murder, despite his defense, which claimed that he had acted out of an overwhelming emotional breakdown. The jury found Paul guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with both Hannah's family and Paul's supporters processing the outcome in different ways. Some saw it as a just result, while others, especially those close to Paul, believed that he had been consumed by the betrayal, leaving them with mixed feelings about the legal outcome. As news of the verdict spread through the community, reactions were mixed. Some felt that justice had been served, while others questioned whether Paul's actions were a result of a man pushed too far by emotional distress. The public, who had once seen Paul as a model of faith and commitment, now saw him as a man who could no longer control his emotions. Was the verdict fair? Could his crime have been avoided if only he had taken a different path? Those questions would continue to linger in the minds of the public for years to come. And that's the final verdict in this shocking case. But what about you? Do you think justice was served? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments. If you're not already subscribed, now's the perfect time to do so. Our next true crime story is coming up. Make sure you don't miss it.